Me, do you want lights on?
Well, I'm looking around to make sure we have all the lights on and the elves in place because they told me that this afternoon I got to visit with my friends from TCEA. Merry Christmas. I know it's a little bit early, but it's always fun for me to visit with boys and girls in school and at home. Not always do I get to hear your Christmas wish list, but I always get to share something of Christmas. This afternoon has been a busy, busy evening for as we get ready for the North Pole Express tomorrow. You may have heard of the Polar Express. Well, the North Pole Express is our famous reindeer games. You know, the one that you sing about in the song Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. All the elves and reindeer quit working at noon and began to do their exercises in preparation for tomorrow. It's going to be a wonderful time of play and the last break that we get before the last push to have all the toys ready for delivery on Christmas Eve. This afternoon, I thought I would share with you one of my favorite Christmas stories: why Christmas trees aren't perfect. They say that if you creep into an evergreen forest late at night, you can hear the trees talking. If you listen very carefully to the whisper of the wind, you can hear the older pines telling the younger ones why they will never be perfect. They will always have a bent branch here, a gap there. But long, long ago, all evergreen trees were perfect. Each one took special pride in branches that sloped smoothly down from pointed top to evenly shaped skirt. This was especially true in a small mountain kingdom far beyond the Carpathian Mountains in Europe. Here, the evergreen trees were the most beautiful of all, for here the sun shone just right, not too hot, not too dim. Here, the rain fell just enough to keep the ground moist and soft, so no tree went thirsty. And here, the snow fell gently day after day to help every branch grow fresh and green. I want you to see at least a few of these pictures because they are so beautifully done. Can you imagine being in the forest outside a castle? Each year, as Christmas approached, the Queen's woodsmen would search the royal evergreen forest for the most perfect, most beautiful tree. The one fortunate enough to be chosen would be cut down. It would then be carefully carried to the castle and set up in the center of the great hall. There it reigned in honor for all the Christmas celebrations. Out in the hushed forest, every evergreen hoped for this honor. Each tree tried to grow its branches and needles to perfection. All of them strained to have the best form and appearance. See the woodsman's looking for the tree? I always like to read picture books, not just to boys and girls, but when Mrs. Claus and I are reading, because they help form the picture in our imagination. One tree, small pine, grew near the edge of the forest and promised to be the most beautiful of all. As a seedling, it had listened carefully to the older trees who knew what was best for young saplings, and it had tried so very hard to grow just right. As a result, everything about small pine, from its deep sea green color to the curling tip of its evenly spaced branches, was perfect. It had, in fact, already overheard jealous whispers from the other trees, but it paid them no mind. Small Pine knew that if one did one's very best, what anyone else said didn't matter. And here's the picture of Small Pine, growing big and strong and trying so very hard to be perfect. One cold night, when a bright full moon glittered on the crusty snow, a little gray rabbit came hopping as fast as he could into the grove of evergreens. The rabbit's furry sides heaved in panic. From beyond the hill came the howling of wild dogs and the thrill of the hunt. The bunny, his eyes wide with fright, frantically searched for cover. But the dark, cold trees lifted their branches artfully from the snow and frowned. They did not like this interruption of their quiet evening when growing was at its best. Faster and faster and faster the rabbit circled as the excited howling of the dogs sounded louder and louder. See the scared little rabbit running around? And then Small Pine's heart shuddered. When the terrified rabbit ran near, Small Pine dipped its lower branches down, down to the snow. And in that instant, before the wild dogs broke into the grove, the rabbit slipped under Small Pine's evergreen screen. He huddled safely among those comforting branches while the dogs galloped by and disappeared into the forest. The dogs went by and they never saw where the rabbit was hiding. In the morning, the rabbit went home to its burrow, and Small Pine tried to lift its lower branches back up to their proper height. It strained and struggled, but the branches had been pressed down too long through the night. Oh well, Small Pine thought, no matter. Perhaps the woodsman wouldn't notice a few uneven branches near the ground in a tree so beautiful. Several days later, a terrible blizzard lashed the land. No one remembered ever having so much wind and snow. Villagers slammed their shutters tight while birds and animals huddled in their nests and dens. A brown mother hen had become lost in the storm. With feathers so wet she could barely fly, she went from one large evergreen to another looking for a shelter, but each tree she approached feared the wren would ruin its perfect shape and clenched its branches tight like a fist. Finally, the exhausted wren fluttered toward Small Pine. Once more, Small Pine's heart opened, and so did its branches. The mother wren nestled on a branch near the top, secure at last. But when the storm ended and the bird had flown away, the Small Pine could not move its top branches back into their perfect shape. It seemed there would be a gap evermore. And here's a picture of the wren being sheltered in Small Pine's branches. Do pages ever stick together when you're reading a book? They do in my book sometimes, which reminds me to be very careful in turning the pages so that I don't tear the paper by accident. Days passed, and winter deepened. The packed snow had frozen so hard that the deer in the forest could not reach the tender ground moss, which they ate to survive. Only the older, stronger deer could dig through the icy snow with their hooves. One little fawn wandered away from its mother. Now he was starving. He inched into the pine grove and noticed the soft, tender evergreen tips. He tried to nibble on them, but every tree quickly withdrew its needles so the tiny deer teeth couldn't chew them. Thin and weak, he staggered against Small Pine. Pity filled the tree's heart, and it stretched out its soft needles for the starving fawn to eat. But alas, when the deer was strong enough to scamper away, Small Pine's branches looked very ragged. See the little fawn eating the leaves on the tree? The perfect shape and perfect lines of the tree were not perfect anymore. Small Pine wilted in sorrow. It could hear what the larger, still perfect trees were saying about how bad it looked. A tear of pine gum oozed from the tip of a small branch. Small Pine knew it could never hope for the honor of being the Queen's Christmas tree. Lost in despair, Small Pine did not see the good Queen come with the woodsman into the forest. It was the first Saturday of Advent, and she had come to choose the finest tree herself because this was a special celebration this year in the history of her kingdom. And this is a picture of the Queen entering the forest. As the royal sleigh, drawn by two white horses, slowly passed through the forest, her careful eyes scanned the evergreens. Each one was hoping to be the royal choice. When the Queen saw Small Pine, a flush of anger filled her. How could such an ugly tree with so many drooping branches and gaps be allowed in the royal forest? She decided to have a woodsman cut it down and throw it away, and nodded for the sleigh to move on. But then she raised her hand for the sleigh to stop and glanced back at the forlorn little pine. She noticed She noticed the tracks of small animals under its uneven needles. She saw a wren's feather caught in the branches. And as she studied the gaping hole in its side into a ragged shape, understanding filled her heart. "This is the one," she said, pointing to Small Pine. The woodsmen gasped, but they did as the queen directed. To the astonishment of all the evergreen trees in the forest, Small Pine was carried away to the great hall of the castle. There it was decorated with shimmering silver stars and golden angels, which sparkled and flashed in the light of thousands of glowing candles. On Christmas Day, a huge Yule log blazed in the fireplace at the end of the great hall. While orange flames chuckled and crackled, the queen's family and all the villagers danced and sang together around Small Pine. And everyone who danced and sang around it said Small Pine was the finest Christmas tree yet. For in looking at its drooping nibbled branches, they saw the protecting arm of their father or the comforting lap of a mother. And this picture shows Small Pine all decorated for Christmas. And the queen and all of the queen's family and the villagers are in the great hall admiring its beauty. So, if you walk among evergreens today, you will find, along with rabbits, birds, and other happy living things, many trees like Small Pine. You will see a drooping limb, which gives cover, a gap offering a warm resting place, or branches ragged from feeding hungry animals. For as many of us, the trees have learned that living for the sake of others makes us the most beautiful of all. Boys and girls, thank you so much for letting me read one of my favorite Christmas stories to you. Now, my friends at TCEA tell me that you're asking me some questions this afternoon, and they're coming in to me on my tablet computer. So let's see what the first question is. For Mrs. Holly's class in Hampshire Fannet Elementary and Hampshire Fannet ISD, what is my favorite movie? My favorite movie is Miracle on 34th Street. Now, I have a second that's almost as favorite, and it's called It's a Wonderful Life. I love those Christmas stories. Chance has sent in a question saying, "Hello, Santa, how are you?" Chance, thank you for asking. I'm doing wonderfully well. Because I'm traveling around the country with some Christmas previews, I'm getting a little bit of allergy, so if I start sneezing or coughing, thank you for understanding that the air where some people live is not quite as clear and pure as it is here at the North Pole. Now, here's a question from a second grade student from the American School Foundation of Monterrey, Mexico. Why do you live at the North Pole? You know, years and years ago, when my great-great-grandfather was looking for a place to build the first Santa workshop, we wanted a place that would be accessible to all points on the globe, have plenty of land to build out the workshop and the warehouses, and so he settled on the North Pole, and my family has lived there ever since. From Fabian in Ben Milam Elementary in Cameron, Texas. Hello, Fabian M. How are the reindeer and Mrs. Claus doing? Thank you for asking. Mrs. Claus is just fine. She's overseeing all the baking and the candy making, and the reindeer since November the 1st have been in their final trial runs for Christmas Eve. Well, as I mentioned to Mars Festival and Reindeer Games, I think they've been playing as much as they've been working. Kelsey E. from Rhodes Elementary in San Antonio writes, what does the North Pole look like? Oh, well, now there is really a North Pole that's a 5-foot tall column that's round, and it marks the very center of town. So that's what that North Pole looks like. But much of the North Pole looks like any other town in northern Alaska. Very, very white and windblown in the wintertime, and filled with lots of laughter and smiles. Hagen S. from Mrs. Haley's class at Chandler Elementary is asking me, what does Mrs. Claus do when you're gone? Oh, she stays very busy giving oversight to the elves in the kitchen and in the workshop. She also enjoys needlework, and she's quite an artist. She's learned to paint with oils this year. Beautiful snowscapes. Mrs. DeBrock's kindergarten class at Leon Elementary and Leon ISD is asking, what is my favorite type of cookie? gingerbread. Mrs. De La Cruz, second grade class from Witharrell Elementary in Whitharold, Texas. And I'm so sorry if I mispronounced that name. So many places have tongue twisting names for me. Do I like marshmallows in my hot chocolate? Oh, yes. I always like at least three. One for now, one for when, and one for then. Gracie C. and Stella C. from Garrison ISD write, if there are vegan cookies and almond milk left out for you, will I still eat and drink them? Oh, yes, and thank you so much for thinking of me on Christmas Eve. I get very hungry making all those deliveries. Mrs. Richardson's kindergarten class in Gladewater, Texas, and Alex F. from White Oak ISD asked me the same question. Where do I get my Christmas magic for flying? Now, I'll tell you, but it's a secret. Will you keep a secret? It's Christmas magic. That's where the magic itself comes from. Christmas magic. Destiny at McGregor Elementary School in McGregor, Texas asks, why does Rudolph's nose glow red and the others don't? Destiny, I've often wondered that myself, and we've asked the scientists at the North Pole if they can come up with an answer, and no one seems to know. It's just part of Rudolph's DNA. Let's see. Here's one. How's Ralph the elf? Ralph is doing wonderfully well. Some of you may remember that a little over a year ago, he was promoted to my number one elf, and I depend on him to help delegate all the tasks involved in getting ready for Christmas. Huyen in at Landis Elementary in Aleph ISD writes, how do you find the reindeers, or how did you find the reindeers? Well, if Ralph were here, he would give you a much more detailed answer. We have a reindeer farm that has, at latest count, 763 or 64 reindeer. All of them are by audition only when they ask to come to the North Pole. Only about a third of those reindeer actually had the Christmas magic of being able to fly. The others help us do chores around the workshop at the North Pole and sometimes travel for me for pre-Christmas parties. Santa, this is Mrs. Napolitano's second grade class in Alvarado, Texas. Hello, Mrs. Napolitano's class. What do I do when it's not Christmas time? Oh, I design and play with toys. And Mrs. Claus and I like to travel in the off season. Mrs. Dotson's second grade class at Trinity School of Texas in Longview writes, have you ever had any pets fly your sleigh? Ever had any other pets fly your sleigh? Well, let me correct something, if I may, for you. Reindeers are not pets, and they don't take it lightly if you suggest that they are. They are very professionals, those ones that have the Christmas magic gift of flying, and they know that Christmas depends on them to do their job and to do it well. Now, for other pets that might fly, flying squirrels just don't quite have the altitude. Do you carry snacks along for your reindeer? Asked Benjamin from Gerald Elementary in Gerald, Texas. We don't let them eat snacks, but we always carry extra feed so that between stops, or rather during stops while I'm delivering the toys, they can get some quick nourishment. Let's see, what's the next question? We are sure you love music. Oh, yes, I do. What's your favorite song? You know, it's hard for me to have a favorite because I like music so much and I like different types of music. I think probably when it gets this close to Christmas, one of my favorite songs is Silent Night. How does Elf on the Shelf get its magic? Mrs. Hardaway's fourth grade class in New Braunfels wants to know. Well, each elf has its own magic and it receives it from its mother and its father. How many elves do I have? The second grade students of the American School Foundation in Monterrey, Mexico asked. At last count, there were over 8,000 of the elves. Let's see what our next question is. Oh, I'm getting a weather report. We're going to have more snow tonight on the North Pole. Now, Mrs. Alden's class from Kennedy Middle School writes, how do you use technology at the North Pole? Well, a few years ago, we added an extension onto the workshop for an IT department. All of us carry tablet computers. There are several mainframes that keep the database of all the nice and naughty lists. And of course, we have the largest GPS in the world. And that's all housed at our IT department. How do I deliver presents to kids who don't have a fireplace? Mrs. D's class from Navarro Elementary in Corsicana wants to know. Well, that's another Christmas secret. Are you ready? I do it with Christmas magic. How do you know what older children want for Christmas? Blythe asks from Ponder Elementary and Ponder IST. Well, Blythe, that's quite simple, my dear. I just ask them. Why do I wear red? Persephone E. from Rhodes Elementary in San Antonio asks. It's my favorite color. It also makes it easy for Mrs. Claus and the elves to find me when I go for my walks outside at the North Pole, because even my outer heavy winter coat is bright Christmas red. Do the elves ever get into trouble? Cade and Julian and Sam from Hampshire Fannin Elementary write. Elves are mischievous and have a lot of fun, but they're always good-hearted. And when they make a mistake or do something that they regret or they know they shouldn't do, they're very quick to apologize and to make amends. How do you build all the toys? What tools do you use to help make them? Asked Mrs. DeBrock's kindergarten class in Leon County. How do I build all of the toys? One at a time. And what tools do I use? Well, if you have a toolbox or a tool chest at home and you see things like a hammer and a screwdriver and wrenches and pliers and awls and punches and lathes and, well, we even use laser printers now for some of our toys at Christmas time. Even have a new 3D printer that is making some of our gifts this year. Do I ever get too hot in my red suit? Sometimes. Sometimes I forget that I'm going from one climate to another so quickly that my body makes it difficult to adjust. So occasionally I do get a little warm, especially when I'm making rounds to Texas, because I've noticed that you boys and girls and teachers in Texas have the strangest weather. It can be 80 degrees one day and snowing the next in the same place. Do I have children of my own? Asked Matthew from Midmilam Elementary in Cameron, Texas. Matthew, Mrs. Claus and I decided a long time ago that we would consider all of the children of the world part of our family. Have you ever lost your boots on Christmas Eve? Is a question from White Harrell Elementary. Have I ever lost my boots on Christmas Eve? No, and I hope I never do, because my toes would get awfully cold, because in the air through which I fly, even the birds would wear sweaters if they could. Do you cut your beard? Asked Claire from St. John's Episcopal School. Claire, I don't, but I have a special elf named Fari who helps me to keep trim and coiffed just the way that Mrs. Claus likes my beard to look. Where do I keep the naughty and nice list? Well, we keep it in the database, of course. And here comes the next question. Mrs. Hampton's second grade class at AEN were wondering if I've ever wanted to change up my Santa suit. You know, the elves in the design division each year have come up with a different idea, a little variance of trim here or color there, but this is the traditional suit that I've worn for centuries. I think it's somewhat of a classic, don't you? If a country doesn't celebrate Christmas, do all the kids still get presents? Asked San Diego from Stephen F. Austin Elementary in Brazosport ISD. I've discovered that in most countries, there are at least a few children who celebrate Christmas. And so those whose hearts are open and who have been good and want to be good boys and girls, we make every effort to make sure that something of Christmas comes into their lives. Do I work year-round? Asked Rayson from Merkel Elementary School. No, I take a vacation a couple of times of the year. Mrs. Claus and I like to travel, and it's healthy for me to get away from the workshop once in a while. The elves can do some remodeling and some things when I'm not in the way that way, and that way I can come back from vacation fresh and renewed for another year of Christmasing. Do I eat cookies and milk every day? Taylor is asking that from O.C. Taylor Elementary School in Colleyville, Texas. Taylor, I would like to, but my doctor tells me that that's not healthy, and Mrs. Claus reminds me, and I hope that you don't eat milk and cookies every day either, because you want to grow up big and strong and be able to do all the things that you want to be able to do. Rebecca from Chandler Elementary in Kilgore asks, if one of the reindeer get hurt, how will I pull my sleigh? You know, that's a very interesting question. Ralph has developed a new plan for us, and this was one of the reasons why Ralph got promoted to chief elf. We have some stopping stations around the world so that if one of the elves becomes injured or too tired, I can make some stops throughout Christmas Eve and we can change out those elves with the initial team. We have, Ralph, excuse me for just a minute. How many do we have? 23. No, 24 stopping stations around the planet that we can use if we need them. Do I like the Dallas Cowboys? Aubrey at O.C. Taylor asks. I like to watch all the football teams, and I cheer for the winners and I weep for those who aren't winning. How did I get my Santa job? Miss Dotson's second grade class at Trinity School of Texas at Longview asks. I received it from my father, who received it from his father. We go back for generations. Kelsey wants to know, what is my favorite drink? Well, it may sound kind of dull, but actually my favorite drink is just a glass of cool water. If I could receive a Christmas gift, what it would be? That's Mrs. Cross's third grade class in Sulphur Springs. Miss Cross, I think if I could receive a Christmas gift, I would like 3 days of uninterrupted reading. Mrs. Cross gave me a new novel last year, and I haven't had time to finish it yet. How do you watch us? I'm being asked. Well, I'll tell you, but it's a secret. It's Christmas magic. Christmas magic makes so many things possible, so many things that are wonderful and joyful and happy about Christmas. We need some more substitute teachers at Alvarado Elementary North. Would you ever consider coming and subbing for us? Miss Hampton asked. Oh, Miss Hampton, thank you so much. I hope that sometime in the future, perhaps after I retire, I might come be a substitute teacher for your school. How do I control the sleigh? Michael asked from Roosevelt Elementary. Now, Michael, you've probably seen a lot of the pictures that have me holding the reindeer's reins, and they go out to the full courses of the reindeer out in front of the sleigh. While we still use those, everything has become electronic now. I mentioned earlier the new GPS system that we have housed at the North Pole. We have several satellites that neighboring countries allow us to use, as well as those here in the United States. And they will broadcast signals from the database GPS at the North Pole into the sleigh. And there's a receiver in the right ear of each reindeer, as well as in my headset. So those directions are given to the reindeer throughout the night. They actually know 3 to 4 stops ahead of time where we're going next. And that helps them use their energy in the most effective and efficient means as we make our deliveries on Christmas Eve. What is my favorite food? Mrs. Hartman's second grade class at Elrod Elementary School in San Antonio asked. My favorite food is the food that Mrs. Claus puts before me when it's time to eat. Do I have any particular country that I like to visit more than another? Oh, each place in the world has a wonderful beauty and wonder of its own, and has special people that I can learn marvelous things from as they share stories with me and open their hearts to Christmas. What color are my eyes? Mrs. Cloths tells me my eyes are somewhere between green and blue. I think sometimes people call them hazel. How are you so quiet when you come to the houses? Asked some students from Stephen F. Austin's STMN Academy in Brazosport. I've never listened to myself to know how quiet I am. I know that I try to be quiet so as not to wake the boys and girls when I deliver their toys. I suppose if there's any secret to that, it would be, well, you know what it would be. Christmas magic. When is your birthday? Kaylee asked from Los Reyes Elementary and Northside Independent. Kaylee, that's a secret. I never tell how old I am, and if you ask me, I'll say, well, I'm a little older than my teeth and as old as my tongue. How do I stay awake all night? Justice B asked from Chandler Elementary in Mrs. Haley's class. Well, Justice, I practice getting on an all-night schedule, a long all-night schedule, 2 weeks before Christmas. In fact, this is Monday at the North Pole. I'll start tonight staying up later and later and later and eating lots of healthy food and drinking lots of coffee so that I'm taking lots of vitamin supplements, which the doctor has suggested, so that I can be very healthy. Oh, I have a message from Ralph. He's out with the reindeer, and they want me to come see how they're practicing for tomorrow. So I guess it's time for me to say Merry Christmas and goodbye. Boys and girls, thank you so much for letting me share some time this afternoon with you from the North Pole. Wherever you are, I wish you a very Merry Christmas. Merry